Welcome to Fuel Your Mind, a web series dealing with all things diesel.
Welcome to Fuel Your Mind. My name is Bram, and I am a hotshotter. I use my diesel pickup to haul freight all over the country. And right now, my diesel, well, it crapped out on me. But I'm looking for a new one. And that's why I decided to stop by and visit my friends at Hot Shot Secret. I thought they would be able to give me the best idea of what diesel I need to get back on the road, and also help me learn what I need to do to keep it moving and keep it going for years to come. And I figured along the way, I might learn some tips and tricks that I'll share with you. Today, we're gonna start with the basics, and we're gonna take a look inside of a diesel engine. The basics of how a diesel engine works. Now keep in mind, this is just a generalization. Not all diesel engines look like this. They come in different shapes and sizes, but they power our vehicles in the same basic way. This is a piston. It has a head, a connecting rod, and a counterweight. The piston lives inside the combustion chamber, compressing the air inside the chamber to the point that diesel can be injected and will combust spontaneously. The injector sends a precise amount of fuel into the chamber at the exact moment to maximize power. Now the chamber is filled with dirty air, which is let out by the exhaust valve. An intake valve lets clean air in, and the process starts all over again. The fuel system is next. From the pump, fuel goes to the fuel tank, passes through a preliminary filter, a fuel water separator, and finally through the main pump. From there, it goes through fuel lines to a small pump, also called an injector pump, which controls the timing and amount of fuel injected into the combustion chamber. It's then used and ejected as exhaust. A new diesel truck can cost you close to $60,000. Even a used one can still run you $20K. But if you want more power, you want a towing capacity of up to 17 tons, or you just want better fuel mileage, then the cost may be worth it to you. So you take the plunge and you shell out all that extra cash for a new diesel truck. Now that you have all of that money invested in your new ride, you want to keep it on the road. You want to protect your investment, especially when diesel engine repairs can be so much more expensive than gasoline repairs. The roots of most engine problems are friction and wear. So let's talk a little bit about how friction works inside your engine and how it will affect your truck in the long run. Here you can see we have some engine parts. We all know that motors need fuel to move, but why do they also need oil? You see, though it appears smooth to the naked eye, metal is actually very rough at the microscopic level. So when two seemingly smooth metal surfaces touch and move over one another, they don't glide nicely. They grind over each other and they shear off the peaks of those asperities. So oil's role in the system is to come between the two surfaces, pushing them apart far enough so that the peaks don't touch each other. This is important to know because up to 75% of engine wear happens at startup. These two blocks represent two metal surfaces with asperities. In your engine, there are various moving parts in contact with each other, as you know. Whether it's pistons and cylinders or the camshaft, it would be nice to think that your engine oil protects all of these parts. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things that affect the oil function, causing friction in your engine. One example is when your truck has been sitting for an extended period of time, say overnight. Much of the oil drains away from the parts it's meant to protect and separate. Then when you start your truck in the morning, it takes a second for the oil pump to circulate oil to these parts again. Until then, friction is what's happening in your engine. Don't forget, this is at the microscopic level, but it is still affecting your engine. Before your truck is started, there is boundary lubrication. There is a boundary of oil and additives, but not enough to keep the asperities from touching. Not only are the blocks hard to get moving, but the surface damage is happening in the form of scratches and markings and furrows and grooves. Once the oil pump has circulated more oil throughout the engine, the lubrication pushes the two rough surfaces apart, allowing them to move more freely. The lubrication becomes hydrodynamic, meaning the protection comes from the viscosity of the oil in motion. Now we know what we are up against microscopically. You can see where friction exists and what causes engine wear. let's talk more in depth about metal wear. We know that wear is the removal of a material from the surface of a solid body, like we saw in the demonstration. Abrasive wear happens when a harder metal rubs against a softer metal, or it could be sand or grit involved, in which case that is called three-body wear. Imagine this happening inside your engine with your piston rings and your cylinder wall when unwanted particles enter the system, like sand. You can clearly see that there is severe damage. Other things that could accelerate the wear could be corrosion of the surface or increased temperatures. One more thing to discuss is fatigue wear. If the applied load is higher than the strength of the materials, you can get small fatigue cracks. These can result in small pieces separating, and now you have even more things floating around, causing three-body wear. Your bearings are where this often can happen. Now, let's go take a look at some actual engine parts to see how this translates to the real world. Do you remember a while ago when I talked about oil's role in your diesel engine? It's to lubricate, to cool, and to protect. But what is oil? And why does it work the way that it does? Well, oil is made up of 70 to 90% base with the rest additives. The additives, there are so many different things. We're gonna mess with those later. I don't have time to go into them today. Today, I just want to talk about base. The American Petroleum Institute has divided the bases into 5 different groups. The API, it's an association that has created the American standard and specifications for the industry. Now, like I said, we have 5 different groups for our bases. Group 1, well, Group 1's not really used anymore. We don't use it in the oil that we use in our vehicles on the road because it had a sulfur content was way too high. It was barely even above crude oil. Group 2 is much more refined. It is refined through a process called hydrotreating. It has a much lower sulfur content. It's actually very common. It's what is commonly known as conventional oil. Group 3 is actually even more refined. It goes through a process called hydrocracking, which leaves the oil more refined and more stable. Next up is Group 4, which is really quite interesting. It's the polyalpha olefins, or PAOs. What they are molecules that are broken down from crude oil at the molecular level. They're then synthesized into something that is even more stable and more uniform. Now, PAOs are very useful because they can be used at both extreme temperatures of hot and cold because of their molecular structure. Now, on to Group 5. Group 5 is, well, it's everything that doesn't fit into Groups 1 through 4. Most commonly, the molecule of esters is in Group 5. Now, these 5 groups can be further broken down into 2 different categories. Group 1 and 2, and kinda Group 3, are known as mineral. It's because they're naturally occurring. Group 4 and 5, and kinda Group 3, are synthetic, which means that they are made in a lab. The reason that Group 3 can go into either mineral or synthetic is because that it is refined to such a degree that it's almost turned into a completely different substance. All right, one last thing I want to show you. This is going to represent what it looks like on a molecular level for your different types of bases. This represents the mineral, which is naturally occurring, so that on a molecular level, their molecules will be different sizes. They won't be uniform. That makes it more difficult for them to get into all the different asperities in your engine and cover all the parts. However, synthetic, once they've been processed, their molecules are all uniform size. That makes it much easier for them to get into the engine parts, cover the asperities, and protect your engine. Now, a lot of people, when they hear oil, they imagine something like this, something that's dark and dirty looking, like a crude that's just out of the ground. Well, what we're going to talk about is actually engine oil before it gets like that. Nice golden color. This is what you put into your engine, and after a long time of wear, this is what you get out. So how do you get from this to this? Well, you don't have to only understand what happens inside your engine, you need to understand what happens inside your oil. So let's head on over to the lab. We're going to talk about the different properties of your oil. When you hear people talk about things like 10W30 or a different grade of oil, what they're talking about is the measurement of the viscosity of the oil. Other properties of oil include grade and pour point and flash point. Now, viscosity is the measurement of resistance to flow. For example, this is an 80 weight. This is a 30 weight. This is a 10, a 5, and a 0. Viscosity is important because engine oil has to be thick enough in order to protect your engine parts, but it has to be thin enough in order to run. Now, if the oil is too thick, it won't run correctly. And if the oil is too thin, oil pressure will fall and wear will occur faster. Manufacturers actually specify the viscosity of oil that is right for their engines, and different engines require different types of oil at different viscosities. Also, different climates will require different viscosities because viscosity changes based on temperature. In cold temperatures, oils get thicker, and in hot temperatures, they get more runny. To help with the problem of temperature change, multi-weight oils were created which behave at a certain viscosity when heated and in a different way at a different viscosity when cold. When it's cold, you want a thinner oil, and when it's hot, you want a thicker oil. That is why we have something like 10W30. The numbers are a grade which measures the viscosity. This means that at a cold temperature, 0 degrees Celsius, the oil behaves like a thin 10 weight, and at a regular operating temperature, it behaves like a 30 weight. The W stands for winter. Viscosity index is a measure of the difference between the weight of an oil at 40 degrees Celsius and 100 degrees Celsius. Another important property of oil is its pour point. This is the coldest temperature that oil will still pour. Or more specifically, it is the lowest temperature at which oil is capable of flowing under gravity. This is important because it's the lowest temperature that oil still functions as a liquid. And finally, flash point. That is the lowest temperature at which oil vapors will ignite. Most oils have a flash point of 400 degrees Celsius or higher. Now, this is important because if your engine somehow gets to that ridiculously high temperature, the oil will combust. There's a common misconception that diesel engines are a lot less clean than gasoline. Well, diesels do put off soot and other particles in their exhaust, which is harmful for the environment and bad for you to breathe. So, in 2007, the government stepped in and mandated that all diesels be equipped with a diesel particulate filter, or DPF, though trucks made before 1999 are exempt from the mandate. I'm joined by Tom Perini, a mechanic. How long have you been a mechanic?
A little over 40 years.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So, I know that fuel injectors put fuel into the combustion chamber. Can you walk me through, well, everything?
The injectors are built to inject the precise amount of fuel into the cylinder at the right time to give you the most power that you can get. There are several different types of injectors out there. The early design were mechanical. They ran off of a push rod, a camshaft. They had a low fuel pressure, and the fuel pressure ran through the cylinder head on most of them. And when the camshaft opened up through the push rod, it would push down on the injector and it would squirt fuel in the cylinder. That was used in semis for years and years. Huey injectors came along, which is a hydraulic electric unit injector. They came out, Caterpillar, I believe, made those in about 93, 94 era. And those had a oil that ran through them, a high pressure oil. They had also the oil pressure opened them. There was no camshaft involved. It had a high pressure pump, and the high pressure pump created 2,000, 3,000 pounds of pressure, and it was always, the high pressure oil was always in the injector, and the computer told the injector when to fire. There was a solenoid on top and there was fuel in it, so you had oil, fuel, and electric, and they were all computer controlled. The fuel had, I would say there's a small portion of the fuel in the bottom of the injector, and you had the oil that come in on the top and push down on a cup that pressed down with several thousand pounds pressure, and that created a high pressure spray that atomized on top of your pistons, and it created a real good burn rate, fairly clean, and it made good power. That was the second design. The last one that we're mostly seeing now is a common rail, and the common rail has your fuel comes up from your tank through a CP3, CP4 pump, and that pump creates pressure itself. It pumps it over to a rail system that has the injector lines that go off of it that feeds the injectors that have there's sensors on the rail also. So you have like a high pressure sensor and a low pressure sensor. Too high pressure, it sends fuel back to the tank, and it just kind of controls the injector pressures to give it the best atomized fuel for the conditions that you're driving. It's also what they're using to meet emissions nowadays is the common rail. You'll find that, I think, 2008 up in the Fords, 6.7s, the Duramax has been using it for years. Cummins is using it in the Dodges, and that's the best one out there right now, we think.
Tom, thank you so much. I really appreciate the information.
No problem. Good luck in finding the truck.
Thank you. The purpose of the DPF is to help lower emissions by cleaning your exhaust. Its location will vary from truck to truck, but it's always somewhere along your exhaust system. Now, I got a little artsy craftsy the other day and made a model of what the inside of one of these filters looks like. All right, and here we are. What do you think of that? Pretty neat, right? I like it. This is the blow up of what the inside of a DPF would look like. See, it's got a bit of a checkerboard structure. These are all channels leading from one side of the filter to the other side. On this side, on the, let's say the front side where the exhaust will enter, some of these channels are blocked off. If you look at the other side, the opposite channels are blocked off on the back end. In the middle, in between, is this porous material, often chloride. What happens is the dirty air, the exhaust from your truck, will push against this side and enter the filter. It enters into the open channels. Once it comes through, it's unable to exit that channel because the back end is closed off. So it is forced to pass through the filtering material and exit through one of the channels that isn't blocked off on the back side. And now what happens is that once it passes through this material, the chloride collects soot and other particles and leaves them behind, keeps them within. And the air that passes out on the back side of the filter is cleaner than what went in. So, what happens when your filter gets so full of crud that it can't work properly? Well, then you're going to have to go through a regeneration process to make the filter work the way it's supposed to. There are 3 different types of regeneration processes, or regens. The first is passive. That's when your vehicle has run hot enough for long enough, usually around 1110 degrees Fahrenheit, in order to burn off all of the soot and everything on its own. That's great. The second, people have a lot of problems with. That's an active regen. And what that means is that your vehicle realizes a regen needs to occur, and it introduces a catalyst into it to make it burn hotter. Now, the problem with that is that during an active regen, there are many different areas that things can go wrong. First, your performance is throttled. Your miles per hour are lowered, and your fuel economy is also suffering because a lot of times your fuel is what is added as the catalyst to initiate the burn. Also, you can't turn your vehicle off. If you turn your vehicle off during an active regen, you probably won't be able to get it turned back on. And if that happens, that's when you have to go to a forced regen. A forced regen is when a mechanic or somebody who has a special tool is able to then initiate a regeneration process intentionally. Now, if your filter does not go through these regeneration processes, it will get completely clogged. And when that happens, you're kind of out of luck. You either have to replace the filter, or you have to take it to somebody who specializes in trying to burn off all the crud from them. That, however, is not always effective, and either way, it's going to cost you quite a bit of money. So that's why it's incredibly important for you to learn as much about your new diesel engine as you possibly can, so you can start to maintain things yourself, and so you can start really caring for your new truck.